Imagine a peaceful afternoon suddenly turning into a nightmare. A young woman, full of life and always caring for her family, mysteriously vanishes. No one knows where she went, and every clue leads to increasingly chilling questions. Today's story takes us into a complex case where family relationships, personal secrets, and dark criminal acts intertwine, making it impossible to look away from every detail. Let's explore each step of the investigation to uncover the truth about Helen Becerra's disappearance and tragedy. Helen had a son named Tom, and he shared in an interview that the relationship between his mother and father was very troubled. Tom's father was not a good husband to his mother, and when Tom was only 9 years old, the couple decided to divorce. After the divorce, Tom and his mother faced many financial difficulties, even having to live in a trailer until Helen met a man named John Becerra. They worked at the same company in Detroit, with John as a manager and Helen working on the auto assembly line. They met at the company and quickly began dating. According to Tom, his mother's relationship with John developed very quickly. John's wife had just passed away from cancer when they met, and Tom only heard about John once or twice. His mother immediately announced they would be getting married. Tom said his mother loved John very much, and they seemed very happy together. John was the main breadwinner of the family, and they often traveled together during their time off. John especially enjoyed taking Helen golfing. Shortly after getting married, Helen decided to quit her job to care for the home and the couple's children full-time. She and her son Tom moved into John's house in Warren. John had 4 children, but when he married Helen, only one of his children, named Joseph, lived with them. According to those who knew Helen, she really enjoyed being a stepmother and caring for her husband's child. Tom recalled in an interview that when they moved into John's house, his room was next to Joseph's room, John's youngest son. He remembered his mother always trying her best to be a good stepmother to Joseph, but Joseph didn't seem happy to see his father start a new relationship so quickly. Tom and Helen thought this would soon pass, as perhaps Joseph was still grieving the loss of his mother. Tom said he couldn't maintain a friendly relationship with Joseph. When Tom was 18 and Joseph was 17, Joseph really enjoyed listening to punk rock music and often played his favorite songs at high volume throughout the house, listening to them for hours. He also liked wearing long coats indoors, using makeup, wearing handcuffs, wearing leather jackets, and using lots of hair gel. Tom said Joseph did everything to fit the punk rock style. In contrast, Tom liked a completely different style of music and was always very quiet, preferring to stay in his own room. However, he began to realize that his presence bothered Joseph. Tom said they were raised in very different ways. Joseph grew up in a financially stable family with plenty of money, while Tom had a difficult childhood, facing many financial hardships with his mother. Tom quickly realized that his presence didn't please Joseph. Joseph always tried to create conflict with Tom, and Tom felt that Joseph was always seen as the baby of the family because he was the youngest son. Joseph seemed to feel Tom was taking that position from him, but Tom insisted he never wanted that. He said he never wanted to cause any conflict in the family. So when Tom turned 18, he decided to talk to his mother and inform her that he had decided to leave home. He explained the whole situation and let his mother know that living there was no longer suitable for him. Afterwards, Tom went to see an Air Force recruiter and joined the military. In early 1983, Tom was in Germany, while his mother, Helen, was on a business trip with her husband John in St. Louis. They were there for several weeks, and Helen decided to return home before her husband to attend her grandson's baptism, as she very much wanted to be present for this special occasion. Helen called her sister to inform her that she would be returning early from the trip and could attend her grandson's baptism. She arrived home on July 31st, 1983, and shortly after decided to go out to buy groceries and a gift for her grandson. Helen knew the baptism would take place the following afternoon, and everyone was waiting for her. However, she never appeared at the baptism. A niece of Helen's shared in an interview that her mother knew for certain that Helen would never miss the ceremony, as she had promised to come and had even returned early from the trip to attend. So Helen's sister was very worried when she didn't show up and didn't contact them to explain her absence. Family members began trying to contact Helen by phone, but no one received a response. Helen's sister and a 14-year-old niece decided to go to her house to investigate. When they arrived, they noticed Helen's car wasn't in the garage, but when they went inside the house, they saw the things she had bought the day before were still there. The kitchen was very clean and tidy. Going through the other rooms of the house, they noticed the other rooms weren't as clean. According to her sister, there was dog hair all over the living room and bedroom, only the kitchen had been meticulously cleaned. They found no sign of Helen there. Helen's sister was very worried about the whole situation, and so she began contacting many of their relatives, asking if anyone had news about her sister, until she was able to contact John, who was still in St. Louis, and she informed him that she didn't show up at the baptism as they had agreed, and that she couldn't find her sister or contact her in any way. However, according to her sister, John didn't seem worried about his wife's disappearance. He was calm, didn't even ask where she might be, as if he didn't care. Her sister naturally found her brother-in-law's attitude very strange, but she decided not to wait and immediately contacted the police department to report Helen's disappearance. The police didn't begin searching for Helen immediately because when her sister reported her missing, she only informed them that Helen had been missing for less than 48 hours. The investigators asked her sister to wait a bit longer to see if Helen would return home on her own. The next day, Helen's sister contacted family members and asked them to gather at the house to search together. While they were meeting, Tom announced that his uncle, Frank, had arrived. Although John didn't return when he learned his wife was missing, he contacted his brother, Frank, asking him to come talk to the family and see if he could help. At that time, they also contacted Joseph, John's son. However, Joseph said he didn't know where his stepmother was because he hadn't been home in the previous days. Since the night of July 31st, 1983, no one in John's family had contact with Helen. So on August 4th, investigators called Helen's sister for an interview at the police station. After talking with her sister, the investigators continued talking with Helen's son, and he said the last time he spoke with his stepmother was on the evening of July 31st. The investigators then decided to search their house and immediately discovered Helen's golf clubs were still in the garage, and her golf shoes were near the front door. This led them to believe that on that morning, Helen had gone to her usual golf course and then returned home. The investigators continued going around the neighborhood and talking to residents to see if anyone had any clues about her whereabouts. One neighbor said they saw Helen come home and park in the garage around 2 p.m. on August 1st. This person also remembered that Helen was still wearing golf clothes and carrying a shopping bag. Later, investigators spoke with another neighbor who said that on August 1st, he saw Helen's car leave the garage after about 2 p.m. Investigators issued an alert about her car and took the opportunity to continue talking with her family members. In these conversations, they discovered that Helen's family was very frustrated with John because he didn't return after the trip to help them search for his wife. They said it felt very strange that John seemed not to care about his wife's disappearance. Tom, Helen's son, said that on August 5th, the family contacted him to inform him that his mother was missing. He immediately requested leave, and just 6 hours after learning the news, he was on a plane returning to help with the search. Tom shared that he was very worried because his mother was everything to him. During the investigation, police discovered the relationship between Helen and her stepson Joseph had become increasingly tense. The family said Joseph often listened to songs they described as about Satanism and the Antichrist at high volume for hours in the house. Helen, being a Christian, had repeatedly reminded and tried to negotiate with Joseph because these songs bothered her, but he didn't seem to care and continued this behavior. Some sources say Joseph was still a teenager when this happened, but other information confirms he was 18 years old at the time of the case. When police spoke with him, they discovered Joseph had a 21-year-old girlfriend named Michelle. Joseph said he had wanted to have Michelle move in with him, but both his stepmother and father opposed it because of her past. According to Joseph, they didn't accept her because she was a topless dancer and thought she was a bad influence on him. Because he wasn't allowed to have his girlfriend live in the house, Joseph decided to bring her there without his parents' permission. However, Michelle chose to live in the basement to avoid supervision from his father and stepmother. Tom said in an interview that he knew about the conflicts between his mother, stepfather, and Joseph and his girlfriend because Helen often shared these issues with Tom. One day when Helen was walking around the house, she heard a noise from the basement. When she checked, she discovered Michelle urinating in a bucket. Helen was very angry and expressed her outrage to Joseph about his behavior. Joseph, in his anger, repeatedly told his stepmother that she shouldn't act as if she were his mother, because she would never be his mother. He admitted that his relationship with Michelle had caused much conflict between him, his father, and stepmother. However, he also said he couldn't believe his stepmother had been missing for so long. He presented his alibi for the day she disappeared. According to him, on August 1st, he wasn't home because he was packing his personal belongings after his stepmother returned and left, knowing that Michelle couldn't be there. So he and his girlfriend stayed in a hotel room. Investigators went to the hotel he specified, and records showed they had checked in at 8 a.m. on August 1st. Later, police contacted Michelle, and she confirmed that her relationship with Joseph wasn't really good and was also tense with Helen. However, they had agreed that she wouldn't interfere with her relationship with Joseph as long as she didn't come to the family's house. They emphasized that they didn't accept this relationship because of her past. On August 6th, John finally returned home after his business trip. According to Tom, Helen's son, his stepfather knew there were many people at home because Helen's family was gathering to search for her. As soon as police knew John had returned, they met with him directly and asked him to check his cards to determine if there were any unusual transactions. But when checking his bank transactions and all his cards, they found no signs that Helen had used the family's money anywhere. John explained to police that he was in St. Louis the entire time, and since it was a business trip, he couldn't leave earlier. Investigators verified his statement. Then they moved on to talk about the conversations they had with Joseph and Michelle, and said they knew the relationship between these two wasn't accepted by John and Helen. When John realized the investigators were directing suspicion toward Joseph, he quickly defended that his son was a good boy who couldn't be involved in his wife's disappearance. When checking records, detectives discovered Joseph had no criminal record, nor were there any police reports showing he had ever been violent. Investigators found no clues connecting John or Joseph to Helen's disappearance, so they temporarily removed both of them from the suspect list. The same day they spoke with John, they received a report that Helen's car had been found at a shopping center in the area. According to one investigator, this shopping area was once known as a crime hotspot at that time, with many robberies and attacks occurring regularly. People who knew Helen said she always dressed nicely and wore jewelry, which could have attracted criminals' attention. At this point, police began to hypothesize whether Helen might have been kidnapped. Police summoned the crime scene team to collect fingerprints and any possible evidence inside the car. While the investigation was ongoing, the family gathered and began organizing search efforts throughout the area. They asked for help from the church and local community, and many people participated. When the results of fingerprint analysis and evidence from the car came back, they didn't bring anything useful to the investigation. Then the police station received a call from someone who wanted to provide an anonymous tip that could help solve the case. This person revealed that Helen had passed away and was buried on a farm about 12 miles from her home, in a very remote area. Investigators seriously considered this tip and immediately deployed forces, including cadaver dogs and helicopters, to search the entire 400-acre farm. Despite searching thoroughly, they still found no trace of Helen. Afterwards, investigators returned to her family and noticed a clear lack of cooperation from her husband's family. Tom said in an interview that they gradually realized they were no longer welcome in John's house. Their presence was clearly bothering this family. What's notable is that despite many people gathering at the house, worried and trying to help search for Helen, John still showed no concern or intention to cooperate. Tom recalled that even in direct conversations, anyone could see John had no goodwill toward helping. Detective Brian noted that not only the family but also the investigators began to notice, because even though his wife had been missing for so long, John seemed completely indifferent. The way he reacted to the whole situation had made police pay special attention. They wondered if there was something else going on in the family that they hadn't been told about. So they decided to dig deeper into John, beginning to review all his bank statements to look for any large debts, unusual transactions, or anything suspicious they could pursue. However, investigators found nothing unusual. 6 weeks passed, and according to Detective Brian, They had followed every clue they had. Finally, the only thing left was Helen's dental records, and they decided to store them in the case file. Tom recalled in an interview that at that time he had begun to feel desperate because he was only allowed 30 days of leave to come home, and there were still no clues about his mother. He said he was both sad and angry, knowing he had to return to the military while the situation was still unclear and there was still no information about his mother. Suddenly, the police station investigating Helen's disappearance received a call from another police station in southern Detroit. Police there reported they were investigating a case in which a couple had murdered someone who was beaten multiple times and suffocated. According to Detective Brian, information about the main suspect immediately raised alarms when they realized the suspect couple was Joseph and his girlfriend, Michelle. The victim was identified as Robert Knox, also known as Bob, and he was acquainted with this couple. A police officer involved in the investigation said having Joseph suspected in 2 murder cases was a major concern. Through conversations with people who knew the couple, police also discovered that Joseph and Michelle had tried to extort $5,000 from Bob for the purpose of moving to California. They also discovered Bob frequently visited a punk rock bar where Michelle worked as a dancer. When talking to many people, a witness said they saw a woman in Bob's house around the time he died. When providing the woman's description to police, they immediately recognized she looked very much like Michelle. Realizing the couple's possible involvement in Bob's case, investigators became more convinced they could also be involved in Helen's sudden disappearance. So police obtained a warrant to search John and Helen's house once more, aiming to find clues about Helen's whereabouts as well as any evidence related to Bob's case. At this time, Michelle and Joseph were being interrogated at another police station while investigators collected all fingerprints and evidence from the scene where Bob was found. However, they didn't obtain any confession from the couple, and their alibis had also been verified. According to one of the investigators, at that time they were certain that both Joseph and Michelle were involved in Bob's case. However, they didn't have enough evidence to prove it, so they had to release the couple. The investigation of both cases eventually stalled and was archived. Tom, Helen's son, said in an interview that just 18 months after his mother disappeared, his stepfather John officially filed for divorce and shortly after married another woman. Tom shared that he was very disappointed with this situation and wondered whether his stepfather knew something about his mother's disappearance and could act that way. Right after remarrying, John moved all of Helen's belongings out of the house and continued living normally with his new wife, completely not participating in the search or expressing any concern about Helen's disappearance. Many years passed without any clues about her whereabouts. Until April 14, 1988, 5 years after Helen disappeared, the case had a turning point when investigators received a call from a man named Glam. One day, Glam read a newspaper article about a drug dealer living nearby who was said to have buried a large sum of money in a forest. He decided to go to the area indicated by the article and saw a pile of dirt, some dry bushes, and a small pine tree, plants that didn't fit the surrounding wild environment, making him feel something was unusual. Deciding to dig, Glam hoped to find the money, but instead, he discovered a bone. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was a buried body. Glam immediately called the police, and when authorities arrived, an investigator said the body was located about 50 feet from a dirt road in the middle of the forest. Experts carefully excavated the area and discovered a black bag containing a female body in a heavily decomposed state, unrecognizable to the naked eye. However, the victim was wearing jewelry, helping to identify that this was a woman. After examining the entire scene, investigators took the woman's body to the medical examiner's office. There, the medical examiner noted she had blonde hair, wasn't wearing shoes, her neck was wrapped with a red cord, her hands were handcuffed, and she was wearing a dress and blouse. In her clothing pockets, they also found a golf shirt. 4 days later, on April 18, 1988, investigators compared Helen's dental records with the body and confirmed that the woman found in the forest was Helen. While serving in the military, Tom received a call from his aunt informing him they had found his mother's body. He said this news made him extremely sad, but actually deep down, he already knew that something terrible had happened to his mother, because he understood his mother would never voluntarily disappear for 5 years without letting the family know anything. He also shared that although sad, he still felt somewhat relieved because knowing the truth, no matter how painful, was still better than living in uncertainty forever. At this point, the investigation was directed straight at Helen's stepson, so they decided to summon John, her husband, to talk again. In this second meeting with investigators, John admitted he knew the relationship between his wife and his son wasn't very smooth. After a preliminary discussion, police took him to the evidence room, where they presented everything found with Helen's body in the forest. When they showed him the fabric wrapping Helen's body, John looked and immediately recognized it as a blanket from his house. After identifying the blanket, John burst into tears right in front of the police. Now the investigation was clear. Helen was wrapped in a blanket from her own home, while her husband was away on a business trip when the murder occurred. This meant the only person who could enter her house at that time was her stepson, Joseph. According to one investigator, from the moment he saw the evidence, John cried continuously and appeared completely devastated. In their eyes, this reaction showed he had realized his son was involved in everything that happened to Helen, as if the brutal reality had truly reached him at that moment. When digging deeper into Michelle, they discovered she had been born and lived for a time in the area where Helen's body was found. Investigators decided to return to the scene once more for a more thorough examination. This time, they noticed a tree growing very close to where the body was buried, and on the trunk there were flaking red paint marks. It seemed something had collided hard with the tree, leaving red paint chips. They also found a piece of red metal scattered in the forest. When reviewing the case file, police discovered previous investigators had once had a warrant to search Joseph's car, and it was a red car. They contacted the mechanic who had repaired Joseph's car around that time, and the mechanic confirmed to police that the car was damaged when the couple brought it in. However, according to his memory, at that time the couple explained they had accidentally damaged the car while backing up with the door open. Continuing to interview the family, investigators discovered that Joseph was addicted to some banned substances, and he often called himself a Satanist, practicing devil worship rituals. He often wore a studded leather jacket with chains, and on the jacket hung handcuffs on the shoulders. Because investigators had found handcuffs on Helen's body, they began to suspect those were Joseph's handcuffs. When analyzing the cord wrapped around Helen's neck, investigators concluded it was actually a red belt from a terry cloth bathrobe. When interviewing Helen's family, police learned that Joseph had a habit of wearing a red bathrobe all day when at home. At this point, investigators decided they needed to arrest both Joseph and Michelle. While waiting for the arrest warrant to be approved, they deployed forces to guard outside the house where the couple was living. Finally, the arrest warrant was officially issued on June 15, 1988, and both were arrested and taken into custody. During interrogation, they discovered a notable detail. Joseph and Michelle had married each other just 4 days earlier. Those involved in investigating the case concluded that right after Helen's body was found, the couple realized they were about to be prosecuted. They believed the hasty marriage was a legal tactic, to take advantage of the rule that spouses are not required to testify against each other in court. Both hired separate lawyers for their defense. An investigator in charge of interrogation after the arrest revealed that he applied a psychological tactic, presenting to both of them all the evidence that had been collected, along with every detail showing they were involved in Helen's death. The purpose was to make them start blaming each other during interrogation. And this tactic worked. Michelle was the first to give a statement. She began trying to convince police that Joseph was the one who did all those things to Helen, while she was completely innocent. She said the relationship with him was very violent. Over time, he became increasingly harsh and abusive to her, making her always live in fear. After being informed of Michelle's statement, Joseph decided to pursue an insanity defense. Right before the trial, he requested to meet with investigators again. This time, he completely changed his tune, asserting that Michelle was just as guilty. According to Joseph's version, Michelle had planned every detail with him and actively carried out the plan to kill Helen. He asserted to investigators that he couldn't be convicted because he was insane when committing the crime. According to court records, Joseph began making bizarre statements. The red robe he often wore at home wasn't an ordinary robe, but the embodiment of a demonic entity. He began rambling about dark rituals. Joseph stated that when he learned Helen was returning from the trip by plane, he performed a magic ritual to cause a plane crash, hoping Helen would die on that flight. But when he saw his stepmother arrive home safe and sound, he realized the ritual had failed. Extremely disappointed, he decided he had to take matters into his own hands. He and Michelle had waited for Helen to come home on August 1st. Joseph held a baseball bat in his hand. According to Joseph's statement, as soon as he heard Helen step into the house, Michelle looked at him, signaled, and said that was the moment they should put the plan into action. With the baseball bat in his hand, Joseph approached and struck his stepmother hard on the head. When she fell to the floor, he took the handcuffs hanging on his jacket and cuffed both her wrists tightly. Realizing she was still breathing, he immediately took the belt from the robe, which he kept insisting to investigators was a creature of the devil, not an ordinary robe, and tightened it around her neck. He strangled Helen until she stopped moving. Afterwards, they both took a blanket from the house and a black plastic bag to wrap the body. They drove Helen's car to dispose of the body. On the way, they stopped at a store to buy some potted plants, then drove to the forest where Helen's body was later found. Joseph told police they bought those plants to plant where the body was buried, hoping that when the plants grew they would cover and camouflage the burial site. Afterwards, both lived as if nothing had happened for 5 long years, pretending to know nothing about Helen's death until the body was finally found. After both confessed, the trial officially took place in April 1989 in Michigan. Joseph still insisted on citing insanity at the time of the crime. To prove this argument, he repeatedly mentioned the dark rituals he had performed. In November 1989, after careful consideration, the jury reached a final verdict. Joseph was convicted of first-degree murder of his stepmother, while Michelle was convicted of second-degree murder. The jury completely rejected Joseph's mental state defense. They determined that he was fully conscious and aware of his actions when committing the crime. Michelle was sentenced to life in prison, but with the possibility of applying for parole after 20 years. She actually served 21 years and was released on parole in 2009. Joseph was sentenced to life in prison without parole. However, after serving 35 years, a new Michigan law declared that sentencing juveniles to life without parole was unconstitutional. Taking advantage of this new law, Joseph requested a review of his sentence, arguing that although he was 18 years old, he was still very young and immature. Defense attorneys cited scientific research showing that the brain at that age is not fully developed. Therefore, Joseph deserved to be considered similar to those under 18, and his appeal was granted. Joseph was granted the right to apply for parole and was officially released in 2024. I read a news article about this case in which many people commented against this decision, believing Joseph shouldn't benefit from the juvenile protection law because he was 18 years old, already a legal adult, when he committed the crime. What about you? What do you think about this case? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you in the next videos.